Hello, and welcome to Inside the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, a webinar hosted by NEDCC, the Northeast Document Conservation Center. My name is Janan Uland, and this is Shanere Neal. We are the field archivists for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project and will serve as your host for today. To start, I'd like us to begin with an overview to introduce the content for today's webinar session. So today we'll begin with a section where you'll get to learn a bit more about Chineri and myself as field archivist. Next, you'll learn about the work that we do as audio field archivists for this project and what that work actually looks like on the ground. Afterwards, we'll discuss one of my favorite aspects of this work, why we do it. And following, we'll have a section for looking ahead into what the future holds for this project. Lastly, we'll conclude with time at the end for any questions you'd like to ask. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get into the first section of this presentation. Hello again, or hey y'all, as I'd usually greet from my Texas roots. My name is Janan Uland, and I am based in Houston, Texas. I am one of the field archivists on this team, the lovely other field archivists whom you'll have a chance to learn more about shortly. I joined this project with a background in community archiving, legal analysis, and education.
Maybe I should unmute. Hi, everyone. My name is Chineri Neal. I'm the other field archivist on this project. I am based in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I joined the project team in February 2024 with a background in libraries and archives, primarily earned through my grad program at the University of Oklahoma and my work in its digitization lab. And Janan and I certainly aren't the only ones on this project. We are a team from all over, made up of folks with lots of different experiences, backgrounds, and passions, including public historians, archivists, audio engineers, summer interns, annual fellows, the works, and more. Our project story starts with the one and only Jocelyn Robinson, our founder and director. She was and still is the director of the Center for Radio Preservation and Archives at WISO, which is a public radio station based in Yellow Springs, Ohio. It's in the archives here that she found historical broadcasts that echo voices of the civil rights movements, and it's here that she worked to share those stories in a project called Rediscovered Radio. There was this sort of amalgamation of ideas and experiences, her work on Rediscovered Radio, the general underrepresentation and erasure of Black history, and the fact that radio typically focuses more on production than it does preserving what they produce. It was this amalgamation that led Jocelyn to lead a survey in 2019 to assess the preservation practices and needs of HBCU radio. So the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, which you might hear us refer to as the project or the RPP, it grew out of this 2019 survey, and a collaborative pilot was co-administered with us at NEDCC. And with that and the Mellon Foundation support, the project is going strong in its implementation phase. Overall, we support the preservation of non-commercial HBCU radio history through community outreach, field archiving, digitization, and audio-based storytelling. We aim to foster an ethos of care among HBCU libraries and station leaders, while also providing mentorship and hands-on experience to a new generation of cultural heritage professionals. And since preservation is at the core of our work, the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, otherwise known as the AAPB, serves as a repository and point of access for the historical audio we collect. And similarly, the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University serves primarily as a repository for the oral histories that we record with our station personnel and community members. And if you're wondering just how many HBCU radio stations fall within the scope of our project, there's 31, as far west as Oklahoma and as north as Ohio. As of this very moment, the project as a whole has been to 18 of these HBCU campuses to work with their communities, and we, of course, look forward to working with more. So, jumping straight into the next section now, let's get into more detail about what it is exactly we do. We are overall dedicated to supplying not only guidance, but physical people power to support preservation work. Our whole process starts with our initial contact with an HBCU in our scope, usually through email, though we've done this before by calling or connecting at conferences and symposia. Once we've made contact, what we refer to as a site visit is our next step to schedule. John, myself, interns, an annual fellow, and public historians will travel to the university for some valuable face-to-face time with our campus partners. This is not as intensive as you might expect. It really isn't. We come to introduce ourselves, say more about our project, and meet the community which we hope to be working with. Typically, we tour the station, libraries, or archives, and other facilities as necessary, really to just get a sense of campus culture and what we can expect on a later return. In the same breath, we can loosely, and might I emphasize in a way that's judgment free, we can loosely assess facilities, capacity, and collections as we go. I personally feel like this is a very important step in what we do. It's almost always a vulnerable thing to let us strangers into a private or treasured or forgotten sometimes space. Establishing trust with our partners and getting to know them first is necessary if we're to help them preserve their own history. So these second visits, we call these preservation visits, and specifically the materials we're looking to collect include cassettes, reel-to-reel tapes, digital audio tapes, and CDs most commonly, but we've also collected continuous loop cartridges and mini discs. This is following our initial site visits. This is where the meat of the work Janan and I do happens. We like to meet virtually beforehand with our station partners before a preservation visit, just to discuss what folks already know about materials, whether they can access the materials, and whether they can gather them prior to our arrival. It's actually interesting. Sometimes we end up going to someone's house to find materials, or the library, or the station, or all three. When we're on campus or at someone's house, or what have you, we've got enough things to look through. We usually go through them one by one. We typically take notes of titles and dates found on each item, as well as their format and other information about them, like alternate titles or any damage, if any. In this process, we're able to assess the physical condition of media and learn about recurring programs so that we can start prioritizing items for digitization. And John will say more about digitization later, but the way we prioritize media is mostly based on how at risk, as we say, some materials are, and whether they seem to contain unique content that's produced by the station. Certain formats are more at risk than others due to their physical composition or the current condition or the availability of their playback equipment, and then we want to make sure we're getting as much of the station's unique content as we can so that we can highlight community voices. After we've looked through the materials and figured out which ones we're sending for digitization, John and I will grab packing supplies, then we'll pack the materials and send them to any DCC in Andover, Massachusetts, all at no cost to our station partners. And actually, I would like to take a minute to explain a bit more about how we prioritize materials. Well, first and foremost, it's highly individualized and depends on the range of materials we find at any given place. The way we prioritize things at one radio station might not be the same as how we do it at another station. So, disclaimer out of the way, we look a couple of big picture items over and work with our station partners to make these types of decisions. One of the easiest things to spot is the labeling on physical materials we look over. We often find titles of shows, names of guests and personalities, or a recording date. These give us a good sense of whether a recording was uniquely produced with the station or commercially produced elsewhere. Also, a handwritten label is usually indicative of unique content. So even if we don't get details like that, handwriting in itself is a hint too. I'd say the type of format plays a big role also. The format can say a lot about how old the content might be, or the likelihood of the content being unique, or how at risk it might be. For example, magnetic reel to reel tapes are usually older than other formats that we find, and they're generally harder to access because of a lack of equipment. Or digital audio tapes, for example, almost always have unique content on them, if any, because they're almost always sold blank and need audio written onto them. Materials that find themselves in less than ideal condition are usually collected before those in better condition. Mold, scuffs, dust, water damage, what have you. These types of things aren't uncommon at all, but they might need professional cleaning and handling at NEDCC to extract the audio from them. Lastly, we consider the institution's capacity to digitize and preserve their own materials. Some might have existing digitization efforts or the available equipment to start some of those efforts. For example, digitizing CDs in-house might be an approachable project for some institutions, or some institutions might additionally be involved in other projects or initiatives to preserve their historical audio. Some might have more manpower than others to do this sort of work. Yeah, like I said, the way we prioritize things at one radio station might not be the same as how we do it at another. We have to be very, very flexible in this regard. And just to illustrate this process, here are some real world examples from Janon and I's work. A moldy magnetic reel with content from a station's unique talk show would be a very high priority, while an unlabeled CD in good condition, but potentially containing commercial music, would be a lower priority. A compact cassette in good condition with an ambiguous title would probably be between these two in terms of prioritization.
Thank you, Janere. Another key component of our preservation visit is what we call the workflow assessment. And so during this portion of the visit, Janere and I, as field archivists, we really take the time to walk through the station's existing workflows. And the goal here is to understand what your current audio creation and preservation practices look like so we can begin thinking about how to support archiving at the point of production. And so some of the questions that we are trying to answer are air shows being recorded and saved? If so, how and where? Are they being uploaded to a website or an app, potentially being saved to a hard drive or stored in the cloud? But getting a clear picture of what's already happening helps us figure out where we can be most helpful and most useful. Additionally, we also like to prioritize a library visit during our time on campus. Janeri and I will meet with library or archive personnel to learn more about the institutional systems and begin planning for the return of those newly digitized files once reformatting is complete. And so this visit also gives us just an early opportunity to think through where those physical materials might be safely housed upon their return. So that way, by the time everything does come back, there's already a plan in place. So another thing is we'd really like to take a moment to highlight another vital aspect of this project, which is the oral history component. Our oral history team is led by our public historian, Will Chakaritis, who's pictured in the image above wearing the maroon shirt. And the voices that are captured through this work tell a story about HBCU radio, how it has shaped people's lives and left a lasting mark on America's history of media and broadcasting. But before any interview does take place, our team takes great care in preparing, conducting, and researching the university, the radio station, and broader communities to ensure that each conversation is grounded and meaningful. So these interviews are conducted both on-site and remotely, and always a priority is given to the comfort and the convenience of the interviewee. Now, I do want to highlight these are not technical interviews, but instead they're expansive whole life conversations that paint a rich picture of each person and how they came to radio. Narrators span a wide range of backgrounds and ages, from HBCU radio workers and alumni to professors, students, elders, community members, to ensure that we get to reflect the full breadth of people whose lives have been touched by HBCU radio. And I do want to note that all of these stories do find a permanent home at Jackson State University's Margaret Walker Center, where they are preserved. And basically, that serves as a repository to ensure that for generations to come, people have access to these oral histories. So, after collecting and shipping audio materials from the radio station, what happens next? Well, the materials from the HBCU radio stations arrive at NEDCC, which is located in Andover, Massachusetts, where they are then digitized by our audio engineers. Now, I want to clarify that digitization is the process of converting that audio on the physical items, things like Janere mentioned, the reel-to-reel tapes, the cassettes, the cartridges, into digital files. And once that audio exists in a digital space, honestly, everything changes. So here's why this matters. Imagine that you have a cassette tape with a recording of something valuable on it. Maybe it's your grandmother singing a lullaby, or maybe it's, I don't know, a family story. But right now, the only way to hear that audio is to have that one tape and a working cassette player. But what happens if the tape gets stepped on, lost? What happens if you don't have a player? Old physical recordings deteriorate over time, and as Shanere mentioned before, these tapes can shed, they warp. We previously saw an image to where tapes had mold on them, which can cause them to become unplayable. And so digitization provides us the ability to capture that audio before it's gone forever. Now, after digitizing, you can make multiple copies to share with loved ones or store as backups, whether that's on your phone, YouTube, a hard drive, or some type of cloud. But the important part here is that you're no longer dependent on the older devices to hear that one sound, and that that audio no longer lives in just that one solitary place. So at any DCC, our audio engineers listen to recordings as one-to-one transfers for quality assurance, giving each tape that proper individual attention. Now, after this digitization is complete, we produce two types of files. The first type of file is called a preservation copy, which takes the format of a WAV file. And the second type of file we refer to as an access copy, which takes the format of an MP3 file. Something that I do want to clarify here is that this is the same content on the preservation copy and the access copy, but just utilized for different purposes. And so preservation copies are a higher resolution file in the WAV format. They're usually a bit larger, detailed, and meant for long-term safekeeping. So if you would like to store or archive a version of your file on, let's say, a hard drive or an institutional server for preservation, that would be your preservation copy. Additionally, what the radio stations receive as a result of our audio engineers digitizing is the access copy. And the access copies are exactly what they sound like. They're for access. So these are the MP3 files. They're a bit smaller and more optimized for sharing, streaming, and everyday listening. So when you hear access copy, you can think things like YouTube, email attachments, or playing audio on a website. But I want to remind us it's the same recording, just built for a different use. So after the audio materials have been digitized, our team then begins planning what we call a return ceremony, and there is a lot to celebrate. First and foremost, the physical materials that were entrusted into our care throughout this whole process of restoration and digitization, including things like DATs, CDs, cassettes, reels, they're returned to the station and the communities that they came from. But the return ceremony I want to highlight, it's more than just a simple handoff. It's a moment to gather with the campus community members, the station staff, and our team to mark what has been accomplished together. And it's also during this ceremony that our team delivers the hard drives that contain the newly digitized files. All of the rich audio that once lived exclusively on aging physical formats is now preserved in that digital space we just discussed, and it's in the hands of the people it belongs to, ready to be listened to and shared more widely than ever before. And so I want to quickly take a pause to point out some of these pictures on the slide. The image that says WCSU with the gentleman who's actually holding that box. First, I'd like to shout out Chinere. She has actually been the one to design that graphic for us. And within that box is actually what the institutions receive that holds the hard drive with those digitized audio files. And so these are some images from the return ceremonies where we really get to engage with the participants of the radio station, the library, and archives, and enjoy and celebrate the return of these audio files. But I do also want to just speak to this point that beyond the ceremony itself, we do also offer ongoing office hour consultations as an additional resource for our partners. And these office hours are open, flexible check-ins where stations can basically bring any questions, they can seek guidance, or we can help them talk through the next steps. So, for example, several of our partners have expressed interest in doing some digital preservation with their own institutional infrastructure. And we've been able to provide advice and recommendations tailored to those specific institutional needs. Now, what often accompanies the return ceremony is what we refer to as a digital preservation workshop. And I think it's really worth taking a moment here to distinguish between digital preservation from digitization, because you could be hearing me and like, Janan, didn't you just say the same things? And I understand they are a bit easy to confuse. But digitization is the process of converting something into that digital file that we just discussed, whether it's the access copy or the preservation copy. Whereas digital preservation is what we refer to as the ongoing care and maintenance that it takes to keep that file alive long into the future. So one is kind of the beginning, digitization, whereas digital preservation is the commitment to ensuring that that item lives. Now, to support our partners in that commitment, our team hosts digital preservation workshops with HBCU campus partners. And during this time, we bring together staff from the radio station, the library, and the archives all in one room. Because simply just handing someone a hard drive full of hundreds of files and metadata can be very overwhelming. So during these workshops, we like to walk through the inventory together and explain the difference between the file types, like I explained earlier, WAV versus MP3. And we also like to introduce digital preservation strategies that will help ensure these audio files remain accessible and intact for years to come. And the reason why I want to highlight this is in the same way that we've discussed how those physical materials deteriorate and degrade, the same thing is applicable for digital files as well. Maybe you've experienced going to a link and it doesn't work, or you try to open a file on your computer and you can't access it. And so this is where the digital preservation comes into play. We want to make sure that this rich history we have just digitized is able to remain findable, listenable, and alive for the people and the communities that it belongs to. So speaking of preservation and access, one of our most trusted partners for both is actually called the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. You'll hear Chineri and I refer to it as the AAPB. And I want to kind of spotlight a bit of the role that AAPB serves specifically for this project. So the AAPB is a collaboration between the Library of Congress and GBH. GBH is Boston's public radio and television station. And the AAPB is built to collect, preserve, and share the nation's public broadcasting history. So through our partnership with the AAPB, we are able to actually offer HBCU radio stations kind of like a ready-made trusted platform for both long-term digital preservation and public access to their digitized recordings, completely free of cost and facilitated by our team. So in practice, this means that stations will always retain their own audio files, but what the AAPB is receiving and preserving are copies of those files. Now, the Library of Congress kind of holds on to these copies in perpetuity, functioning as like a permanent trusted backup. So they serve as more of the preservation side of things. But beyond the historical recordings that we digitize together, the AAPB can also serve as a permanent home for born digital content. So when I say born digital, think about the audio that was like never on a physical tape to begin with, but it was recorded and saved digitally from the start. So let's say, for example, there's a show that a radio station records and exports directly to a computer today. That file will be seen as born digital. Now, the AAPB can actually continuously receive and preserve that kind of content over time, functioning as like an ever-growing archive that captures not just the station's past, but its present and its future as well, which is really, really resourceful. It's also worth noting that when it does come to these access and copyright, like over these copies that the AAPB receives, meaning who can listen to, use, or build upon that material, that is customizable dependent on the university, the radio station, and what works best for them. So stations do have the ability to opt in to whatever level of access and copyright protection best reflects the needs and wishes of the communities behind those recordings. But overall, the AAPB is our primary recommendation for digital preservation and access, and we handle the facilitation to make partnering with them as seamless as possible. Although we do recommend the AAPB, it is definitely not the only path forward. There are other options that exist, including a station's existing internal infrastructure. Let's say maybe they have like a website to where they would like to display some of those recorded audio or those digitized audio recordings. We also have the HBCU Digital Library Trust. There's statewide consortia and many other options. And so with whatever option, we work with each HBCU partner to think through what does make the most sense for their specific institution, because we recognize that it's not just a one catch all. Community engagement. So this is a really, really fun part of the project for me personally. Beyond the preservation visits that we make ourselves to where we get to engage with the lovely staff and intel at these HBCUs and radio stations, something that our team does is we really prioritize community engagement being woven into the fabric of everything we do as a project. And so one of the ways that we continue to grow and learn is by drawing on the wealth of knowledge that already exists in the communities we work alongside with. This includes visiting local museums, cultural institutions, and really any other community resources that hold history connected to the stations and the people behind them. The reason why this is so valuable is because these spaces teach us things that maybe an archive or a library cannot, and they also help us stay grounded in the broader context of the work. And so just being a bit transparent, there's been many times to where taking these community engagement trips and getting to learn more about maybe the history and the local community of that radio station has then enabled me to go back to the line of work and really have a clear understanding of maybe it's metadata that I'm reading on the tapes, or maybe it's the history of the station and the way that that station really contributes to its surrounding community. So we are very deeply committed to community engagement. The next point that I would like to touch on is this training and mentoring. We really prioritize training the next generation of preservation and archival professionals, and we do this through mentoring interns, project fellows, and students on site. Something that Janera and I always love to offer up whenever we do have these preservation visits is connecting with any professors, radio station personnel, and just asking them, hey, do you all have any students who are interested in learning a bit more about audio preservation, preservation in general, and getting some hands-on experience to the work that Janera and I do. And that's always a really, really valuable experience to get to share in that work with students who are interested. And finally, we do actively seek out opportunities to present this work that we're discussing at conferences, symposia, and any other professional gatherings. These spaces allow us to share what we've learned and connect with others doing similar work across the field, and also just stay in conversation with the broader preservation and archival community, because we recognize that this project, it does not exist in isolation, but it's just part of a much larger ongoing effort to ensure that underrepresented histories are preserved, that they're accessible, and that they're also celebrated.
Uh, so let's take a second to touch on why all of this work that we do is important. You might already have a sense, but let's go. Well, the short answer is that time passes and will continue to pass, right? The longer we wait to preserve, the harder it will be to remember. And the more we don't remember or record or document in some way or another, the more history can be written by, frankly, those who don't understand. The sentiment I'm trying to convey is that our work is urgent. Firstly, the work our colleagues do to record oral histories is important because people get older and their memories fade, they pass on, and when this happens, their stories and lessons aren't always heard. We risk missing out on their perspective and knowledge and their very being by waiting. Following that, the same idea can sort of be applied to that physical audio at these stations. You know, radio tends to focus on production more so than preservation, understandably, by the way. So it's not uncommon for there to be only some recordings of their airtime. And those recordings that do get made deteriorate and break down over time in a way that, as Janan said, makes it impossible to hear what's on them. Speaking of which, sometimes the only way to know what's on these materials is to pop them into whatever device they require for playback and to listen to them. So they're not like paper documents or even film strips where you can visually see what's on them. You need specific equipment to listen to these materials. And as we create technological advances, for example, the evolution from a vinyl record to an MP3 player, this specific equipment becomes less and less accessible as manufacturers focus on newer devices. And it becomes harder and harder to listen to this old audio. So if that sounds like a lot of jargon to you, what I'm trying to say is that the older audio materials are, the more they're at risk of becoming inaccessible or obsolescence, as we've written there on the slide. Uh, all of this is, of course, compounded by other challenges, like getting the necessary resources to engage in preservation in the first place. It's not always as accessible as you'd want it to be. And we just know how urgent our work is and how important it is. That's why we do our work and support this in hopefully a sustainable way.
So, as you've probably started to notice at this point, our project is very dynamic with multiple moving parts and facets working together to serve HBCU radio stations. Janeri, I believe, had said this before, saying that no preservation visit, no site visit is the same. And that's something that we really had to take on early on when we began this work, is recognizing just how individualized every campus is, every radio station, every experience that we would have working to serve these communities. So with that being said, we are really excited to share some points about looking ahead into the future of this project. So, as we look ahead, sustainability truly is at the heart of how we think about this project's future. From the beginning, we have been very intentional about documenting every facet of this work. The visits, the processes, the relationships, and the decisions made along the way. And that documentation exists not just as a record of what we've done, but also as a roadmap for hopefully whoever carries this work forward. Preservation work like this is bigger than any one team, and we want to make sure that everything we've learned and built is clearly archived and easy to reference when this project continues beyond us. But I am excited to also mention that we're in the process of developing educational resources to be added to our website. These educational resources are going to be practical tools and guides designed to empower our HBCU partners to continue this work independently and confidently long after our direct involvement has potentially ended. And so the goal here is to leave something that keeps giving, that continues to give the ability to serve and educate and equip our partners with what they need. And as mentioned earlier, we also remain available to our partners through ongoing office hour consultations. Again, this is an open door for questions, guidance, support whenever and however it's needed. But ultimately, we do see this project as one that will live on. The recordings that we've helped preserve, the relationships we've built, the frameworks that we've documented, and the people that we've trained are all part of a foundation that we hope to continue to grow. HBCU radio history really deserves to be safeguarded, not just for today, but truly for the generations to come. And that's exactly what we're looking forward to.
Thanks, Janon. That made me smile. I think we've got some time for questions, so feel free to unmute and just ask them or just ask in the chat. We'll be watching that too. Oh, and I guess while we're waiting for questions, I will shout this out. For more information, I recommend you explore these websites. One is for the project itself, and one is for NEDCC. Both have their own socials, newsletters, and more information. You may like to know that you can listen to some of our oral history work, or podcasts, or radio recordings from other things through the Listening Hub on the project's website. And NEDCC has more interesting resources about preservation, archiving, and other unique services that they provide.
We do have one question in the chat, Janere, from Shelby. Thank you, Shelby, who's asked, what has been the most interesting thing we have been able to digitize?
Okay, I have something that comes to mind actually. I will say that Janon and I ourselves aren't the ones that digitize them. That would be our audio engineers at NEDCC. But some of the things that we have heard from what she has digitized, the first thing that comes to mind is Miss Sharon Kay at WFSK. We unearthed one of her old introductions to her show, What's the 411? And it's just like this really cool and catchy song. And it's like, What's the 411 with Sharon Kay? And it's so good. And apparently she hasn't used that in a really long time. And she had like kind of forgotten about it. So when we brought that to her, she was like, really excited about it.
Yeah, that was honestly, I love that. Like the 411 by Sharon K, it stays a staple in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Janere often like sing it to each other.
Thank you,
Um,
Shelby.
Another one that came to my mind, I'll be honest, there's some that are currently in the process of being digitized that had some really interesting labels. So, as Shanari said, we're not the ones that actually get to digitize and do that one-to-one listening transfer. But Janera and I are the ones that have like the first look at the audio materials. So we're looking at the labels, the metadata, trying to have conversations with the community members to figure out what could be on the tapes. Um, and one of the interesting things that we did get to hear back was the assistant director for our project actually ended up being on one of the tapes because she used to serve where did she work at, Janelle? I cannot remember.
WCSU,
Yes,
Central State.
WSU at Central State. And so when we went to Central State, they had digitized some audio and we were able to listen to our assistant director be on that digitized audio. And it was just a really cool full circle moment to hear her voice.
Oh, I have one more I just thought of. when we, where were we? We were at WEAA in Baltimore, Morgan State University. We found a recording where it was like the last recording of this show. Like they were going to stop doing this sports show. And like the introduction, the guy's like, this is the last recording for these reasons. And so we're not going to let this hold us back. We're going to keep going. And it's just interesting to like pop in a CD. And like, that's the first thing I hear about the show is the way that it ends. Braylon said, I just want to commend you both on your continued outstanding work. The work you're doing is truly beautiful, and it is evident how much care and compassion you pour into it. Thank you, Braylon. That's very sweet of you.
Victoria has asked, was there a particular oral history that was extra exciting for folks to take slash hear the story from?
Are we thinking of the same one?
Yes,
Miss
Prof.
Thelma Williams.
You can go ahead.
Miss Thelma Williams is a 101-year-old woman that lives in near Grambling State University. That's KGRM. Actually, our fellow for this year, Dana Green, reached out to her and her daughters and scheduled an interview with her. And it was just a really interesting process to like they literally showed up to this woman's home and they spoke with her and interviewed her, and her daughters were there to support her. One of her daughters was deaf, so like they had to stop like momentarily to communicate things to her, and it was just like I think Dana was very excited about that one. It was a very different experience from how we usually do our oral histories.
And I also want to add a little bit more context to that trip, even for our end as preservationists, because I think that's a good example of how each visit really does look differently. And so Janera and I were able to visit Miss Thelma's home because we believe that there was an opportunity that she may have had some audio materials connected to the radio station. So she welcomed us to be able to come look. And during that visit at her home, Janera is utilizing sign language to communicate with Miss Thelma's daughter. And I think even that just really paints like a clearer picture of really how distinct every preservation visit and trip is, because that was a very personal one. Janera is using sign language to communicate, and we're inside her home and really getting to look at a lot of just history and rich history, and also learn her story and her upbringing as well, with her being 101 years old. So that's why Miss Thelma is, for us both personally, is just a beautiful oral history to listen to, but also just a great memory of a site visit that was really special for us.
Shelby is asking, have you guys had a chance to visit Howard U in DC? Their library and radio station are both incredible. I'm sorry if you can hear the helicopter over my house. Let's see. I don't think off the top of my head Howard U falls within our scope. If I remember correctly, it's a commercial station, and our scope is specifically HBCU stations that have unique and non-commercial content. I haven't been there, but I would love to
Yeah.
go. Any other questions for us? Okay, I think we'll go ahead and end the recording here. Thank you for your time and sharing this project. Yes, of course. So we're ending the recording.